We are now on the record in the matter of Aviana Bailey and CRJ versus Chief Michael Chitwood et al. Today's date is October 20th, 2016, and the time is 10:13 a.m. This is the videotaped deposition of Chief Michael Chitwood being taken at Southern Reporting Company, 747 South Ridgewood Avenue, Suite 107, Daytona Beach, Florida, 32114. My name is Michael Heine. I am the videographer, and the court reporter is Jane O'Brien. We are both representing Southern Reporting Company. Counsel, please introduce yourselves for the record, and then the court reporter will swear in the witness.
John Phillips for plaintiffs.
Bruce Bogan for the defendants, Chitwood, Mersereau, and the city.
Sir, will you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself for the record.
My name is Mike Chitwood. I am currently the Daytona Beach Police Chief and have been for the last 10 and almost 10 and a half years.
Excellent. And Chief Chitwood is the preferred way to address you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Obviously, I'm appearing by telephone today and appreciate that consideration. But because of that, it's probably even more important for us to take turns. I assume you've had your deposition taken before?
Yes, sir.
You know, sometimes it's easy for us to get into the normal habit of anticipating what each other is going to say and making conversation shorter. Depositions, that's a bad trait, and when one's appearing by phone and I can't see when you're done answering or vice versa, it makes it even more difficult. So let's just, try to keep that in mind both for you and for me. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Could you give us the benefit of your kind of education and vocational background?
Yes, sir. I have been a police officer for 28, starting my 29th year next month. My career began in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania with the Philadelphia Police Department. I started my career walking the footbeat, and I ended my career as a lieutenant in the homicide division. In between, I had served in narcotics, patrol, tactical, special events, special investigations unit. When I retired from the Philadelphia Police Department after nearly 18 years, I was one of the most decorated police officers on the police force, having been commended over 50 times, including the Medal of Valor. My education, I have a bachelor's degree in organizational management from Eastern University in Pennsylvania. I have a master's degree in criminal justice from Nova Southeastern University in Davie, Florida. I am a graduate of the FBI National Academy, class number 204, and I am also a graduate of Northwestern University's School of Staff and Command. After I left the Philadelphia Police Department, I became the police chief in 2005 in Shawnee, Oklahoma, where I spent 1 year, and then in 2006, I was named the police chief in Daytona Beach, where I am currently employed until January 1st of 17, when I become Volusia County's new sheriff.
Excellent. That was a recently elected position?
Yes, sir. Primary was held in August, and I won in the primary and become the sheriff on January 1st.
Excellent, and congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
How is, in some of the questions, you don't know what you don't know, and so I'm trying to fill in some gaps, and I may ask questions that may not quite hit on the subject, but until I find out what your partial answer is, it's hard to do that. I say that to say kind of what's the organizational structure at Daytona Beach Police regarding the levels between you and for instance the patrol officers?
You would have, and I will not know. I don't know if I had a deputy chief at the time. Because of the economic downturn, we lost positions. I would have had 4, again, not knowing if I had a deputy chief or not, I would have had 4 captains, 8 lieutenants, 16 sergeants, and then the line officers and detectives would fit in.
Okay. obviously this happened, I believe, on April 28, 2012. Before then, what interaction would you have had with Officer Mersereau? Like, how familiar were you as of the time of this incident?
I would have observed, as the police chief, I go out on patrol regularly. So I would have observed Officer Mersereau in the field. I would have observed him at family functions that the police department has, such as award ceremonies or a Christmas party. And I would have obviously had contact with any recognition or discipline that would have been forwarded into my office in reference to Officer Mersereau.
As of April 28, 2012, did you have any personal relationship with Officer Mersereau, kind of outside of the office, so to speak?
No, sir.
Have you since?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you share any family with Officer Mersereau?
No, sir.
Okay. Does Daytona Beach Police participate now, particularly, in the concept of community policing?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that. What is community policing?
Community policing for me is really simple. It's when the community or someone calls, you provide the highest level of professional service that you can. Now, we go much further than that broader topic in the fact that, I am the only city in this county that has 10 police officers in school resource officer capacity that serve in the 10 schools. There's no other city, actually there's probably no other city around us that does that. My PAL program is not a traditional PAL program that deals with sports. Our PAL program deals more toward education and mentoring. An example would be that 60% of all the school-age students that live in the 32114 zip code live at or below the poverty level. So it's important for us as police officers to establish programs that help our kids defeat poverty. And my big thing is a lot of the kids we lock up, they cannot read. So we have a juvenile ankle monitoring program. I think there's only 2 of us in the state. I think it's us and Fort Myers is the other one. And the purpose of that ankle monitor is a last step before secure custody. And the young man or young woman is put on a bunch of sanctions. Now, they have to go to school, and they have to participate in our PAL program, which is mandatory drug and anger counseling. It's mandatory tutoring. They have to come after school to get their homework done, and we want to improve their reading scores. We also do things such as shop with a cop. We identify X number of families per year that live below the poverty level that would not have Christmas, and we take those folks out Christmas shopping. During the Ferguson issue, we partnered with Bethune-Cookman University and the NAACP and held, I don't want to call it diversity training, but it was open forums for my officers. It was mandatory, I had to attend, and the objective was to talk about race and policing, in particular how it relates to Daytona Beach. And it was a symposium where both sides got to talk about their issues and their concerns, and then the second phase was to develop ways to overcome that. We are extremely active in all of the Town Watch groups. I think we have 12 throughout the city. My command staff, and the officers that are assigned to that geographical area participate in that.
And why is that important, or why was that important after Ferguson?
It became more important. It was always been important. We've always done those type of things, but it became more important after Ferguson because I think it exposed a nerve in our country for all of the mistreatment that goes on in the African American community. And I think anybody with a brain cell would have to say that our history of our country and race relations has been horrible since the 1600s. So there's a deep-seated fear and a deep-seated resentment toward the government in general, in my opinion, for the way the minority community has been treated. And it is extremely important that I think Ferguson reminded us all of something that some of us weren't in policing back then. You know, the Watts riots in L.A., I wasn't a police officer then. I was a little boy when that happened. The riots in Philadelphia, the riots we had here in Daytona Beach, a lot of my officers weren't alive when that transpired. So I think Ferguson exposed a root of distrust. It exposed deadly force policies that for years the African American community has complained about. And that's why I think it's important and continues to be and will remain important as long as I'm in charge.
Do you think those concerns by the African American community were founded or unfounded?
Founded.
Tell me about that.
I will tell you that I've been a cop for 28 years, and I would not believe some of the things, if somebody told me what they saw on video were true, I wouldn't believe them until I saw the video.
What do you mean?
Let's take Minnesota, for example. You have a car stop where the man tells the officer that I have a gun permit, and he has his girlfriend and his young child in the car, and he ends up getting shot and killed when he reaches to get his gun permit.
Right. How long has Daytona Beach Police, under your leadership, engaged in a form of community policing?
We always have. Since the day I became the police chief here, one of the promises that I made the community was we were going to increase diversity and that we were going to increase transparency and accountability.
And how have you done that?
We were the first police department in the state of Florida to institute a body camera program. Is one of the ways. The other way is through our de-escalation policies. The Tampa Bay Times is about to release a story in which the city of Daytona Beach ranks #1 in a good way when it comes to use of force and deadly force encounters.
Do you know what percent, I mean, whether, I imagine it hadn't changed much, but as of 2012, April of 2012, do you know what the percentage of the minority population is in your jurisdiction?
I'm going to tell you, the easiest way to round it is 60-40. It's a little less than that. It's probably 57% are white, and the remainder, and the vast majority of that remainder of the population is African American. We have a small amount of Hispanic or Asian population.
The majority would be which side of the equation?
White.
Okay. You know, you used the term de-escalation. What does that mean?
De-escalation for us is basically the sanctity of human life has to come first. We have to do everything in our power to make sure that the suspect and the officers all go home safely. The caveat to that is it's predicated on whether or not the suspect wants to take advantage of those policies and procedures that we have in place.
Certainly. And I assume that, you know, kind of going home safe is both inclusive of going home alive and going home without serious bodily injury for both sides of the equation. Is that fair?
Objective form. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Okay. How many officers have been shot and killed? Well, first of all, how many officers have been shot as a result of hostile gunfire in Daytona Beach in the last 5 years?
Objective form. Go ahead.
Thank God, none.
Okay. Dating back to the beginning of your tenure, how many have been shot?
Thank God again, none.
So I assume if there's been none shot, there's been none. Well, I guess they could receive fatality by another method. Has there been any officers of Daytona Beach killed by a hostile person in your tenure?
Thank God, sir, none.
Okay. How important is communication between law enforcement and the broader community?
It is paramount to our success.
Tell me about that.
Check to form. Go ahead.
Let me just ask the question, why?
Okay. I'm going to use the word transparency and trust are the keystones to good communication. Anecdotally, what I can tell you is we have had incidents occur in the city where I guess the one story I'll use is 2 years ago we were dispatched to a domestic disturbance call. The officer who arrived on scene completely disregarded policies, procedures, and state law in dealing with domestic violence. And as a result of his inactions, the victim was murdered later that night by her husband. All the initial reports were this was a tragic thing and the cops didn't do anything wrong, until I reviewed the body camera video and discovered that we did everything wrong. And as a result of that, I held a press conference against the wishes of the city attorney and outlined what we had done wrong, that it was our fault that this woman was dead, and the policy changes and the training changes that were going to take place to ensure that this not happen again. And of course, the officer was fired. I think that it encapsulates everything that I've done here or tried to do here, right, wrong, or indifferent, to have community communication and engagement lines open.
Certainly. When I refer to this incident from here on out, I'm referring to the April 28th, 2012 incident between Officer Mersereau, Marvin Jones, and more particularly Aviana Bailey. Is that okay that I can refer to that as this incident? Are we on the same page?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I assume you're familiar with this incident?
Yes, sir.
You were probably made aware of that incident on the night of April 28, 2012?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you reviewed depositions in this case?
I have not.
Okay. I don't want to know the subject of your conversations, but have you been briefed along the way by either the Mr. Bogans or his office or the city attorneys as to what's going on in the civil case?
I had about a 10-minute conversation with Mr. Bogan this morning, shortly before I arrived here.
When was the last time you would have spoken to him or a city attorney about the civil case before that?
I've never spoken to the city attorney about this, and the last time I spoke to Mr. Bogan was probably several years ago over a car accident claim.
Okay. You talked about that domestic incident and how you learned and made changes from it. Has Daytona Beach Police? I'll strike that. Did Daytona Beach Police or you learn anything from this incident?
Check to form. Go ahead.
If I could go a little off script for a second, how is Miss Bailey and the baby?
Miss Bailey is paralyzed from the chest down.
Yes.
And the baby is residing largely with another family because of her paralysis and some issues that the baby's having, being kind of non-compliant, and they don't know whether it's because of the kind of separation or because of medication or what. But they are alive, but it was a traumatic night, and there are effects from it.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you for saying that. I had been to the hospital that night to visit her, and I know that she had given birth. I haven't heard anything since like maybe May of that year.
Thank you for asking. Back to the question. Did Daytona Beach Police learn anything from this incident?
Objective form. Go ahead.
We have, and it's something that is incorporated in our training, and it's how do you deal with suicide by cop? Because basically what we found was, and I've been in 2 police shootings in my career, you get tunnel vision. Somebody's pointing a gun at you, somebody's firing at you, and you're in point blank range. Your training and the reactionary part of your brain kicks in, and you're focused on stopping the threat that's trying to kill you. And you don't really have the peripheral vision to see what's behind you, your depth of vision, I should say, what's beside you, and you're dealing with somebody who wants us to kill them in a dynamic situation. There's more static situations where we've employed the quote de-escalation, where the person was a dynamic shooter contained in an area where we had plenty of time to take cover and concealment. But the question has remained in training: how do you get to cover and concealment when you're walking up in a car and a guy opens fire on you? And we don't have the answer to that, but we try to train to instill in the officer that you have a duty to protect yourself and the community, but how are you going to deal with it with somebody who wants you to kill him or her?
Right. And we're looking at this, or we've kind of divided this case into 3 scenes. What happened at the airport, what happened on Petty, and then what happened down the line on Flight Line. And certainly, I think everybody is in agreement that there were shots fired by Marvin Jones on scene 3, and there's some dispute of when and the timing and the amount of shots at scene 2, and that's kind of that's our understanding of where Aviana Bailey got shot, and so that's kind of where I'm focusing is the things that happened at Petty, and what is your understanding of how many officers were on that scene at the time Mersereau exited his vehicle?
Objective form.
I don't know specifically.
Okay. If there are 2 to 3 officers responding, is there an obligation, or was there an obligation at the time of this to coordinate amongst those officers, amongst themselves?
Objective form.
There is an obligation, but I can tell you, from personal experience, when all hell is breaking loose, it's kind of hard to get that symmetry, that coordination of, hey, this is what we're going to do. Some scenes are so dynamic that you don't get the ability to set up on it because it's too fluid. It's not static. Like you have somebody coming in and out of a house firing shots where you're locked down. This is more mobile.
Certainly, would you agree with me that there was a point, and I don't know what you're aware of the facts, but that there was a point before Officer Mersereau got out of his car that there was no hell breaking loose.
Objective
to use your
form.
terms, that there was no, violence or attempted violence or threat of violence by the driver of the Lincoln.
Objective form.
My understanding was that there was an incident at the airport that the vehicle went over when deputies approached it, went over the stopping mechanism there, and that they were going after somebody who was brandishing a firearm at the airport who was driving erratically. Was my understanding.
Right. Do you know if an officer ever saw a firearm at the airport?
Objective form.
I do not know what they saw. I just know what the radio transmission was.
Right.
Remember the radio transmission.
Certainly. And my understanding, and I've got it let's see, I've got it right here, as there was a radio transmission of a man sitting in his car waving a gun around, and then it said waiting for someone at pickup. Do you know what status of the law was in April of 2012 regarding waving a gun around in the parking lot or waiting area of an airport?
Object to form.
I'm not going to assume, but I would assume it was a crime.
Do you know whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony?
I do not.
Okay. Do you know whether it makes a difference as whether somebody's in a parking lot or in the airport as to whether possession of a gun or exposure of a gun is a different criminal violation?
Object to form.
I don't know the specifics of that.
There's also a radio transmission indicating B/M. I assume that means blackmail?
Yes.
Typically? Okay. Does that matter? I mean, certainly I get for identification purposes, but are your officers taught to respond differently if it's a black male versus a white male versus a black female versus a white female?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you see officers who take that into account and respond differently?
Object to form.
If I did, they would be fired.
Okay. It's going to be our contention that the person who made the ultimate, 911 or police call was basically trying to set up Marvin Jones, that he was creating false information. Is there a duty on law enforcement to try to verify the accuracy of the information that they're responding to?
Object to form.
We try our best to do that. Unfortunately, flash information or that first information is normally kind of hard to verify. It's not right all the time. It's not wrong all the time. It's inconsistent.
There's an entry, and I think I've gotten this answer before, but there's an entry on the dispatch report S/4, and then a hyphen, and then D, signal forward or signal 4D. What does that mean?
Car crash. I'm not sure what the D means, but signal 4 is a car crash.
Okay. And there's another one right after it that says patched, PATCHED, then a space, and then DBA, and then a space, and then PS, and then a space, and then a space, DBW. So patched, DBA, PS, and DBW. Do you know what that means?
The DBA would be Daytona Beach Airport, which would be the sheriff's deputies, their channel, and it would be patched with channel 1, which would be the officers that would cover the geographical area around the airport. I don't know what that P, F or
PS and DBW?
Yeah, I don't know what that would be.
When a report is made as to shots fired, is there training or is there a guideline which says you only report essentially hostile shots fired, or is that inclusive of officer shots fired? Does it what does that mean as far as what officers are supposed to report?
Can you be more specific in that? I mean, I don't.
Certainly.
Yeah.
When our officers taught, well, what is the training of an officer when it relates to reporting shots fired on the radio?
Object to form.
We're all trained to report what we see, what we observe, and what we hear immediately. So,
okay.
If I was driving down the street and heard gunshots coming from the 700 block of South Ridgewood, where we are now, that's what I would report. I'm in a 700 block, 747 South Ridgewood. I heard gunshots in the rear parking lot.
Now, would that be inclusive if you're reporting shots fired of your own shots? In other words, I fired shots fired, or is that just adverse, or can you even tell?
Objective form.
I think what you have to reconsider is the dynamics of what's going on.
Right.
There, in my opinion, from my personal experience, being involved in a shootout, there was, while time slowed down, there was also a lot of things that you go back and didn't realize that you were saying on the radio. I mean, your shots fired is going to get the cops there faster. You want to get out the information as quickly as you can, and then as time slows down, we are then by policy and training are to notify dispatch that you, in fact, fired your weapon.
Okay. One thing I'm trying to understand is my understanding that 2 to 3 different officers in 2 to 3 different vehicles, meaning up to 3, I think 3, possibly 4, Daytona Beach police officers were on this scene fairly contemporaneously. And with that, taken as true, with all of them before attempting to, get out of the car and investigate or interview a suspect.
Hold on. Is that a question?
Yes.
Object to the
Well,
form.
basically, I'll rephrase it. What's the policy and procedure when you have multiple officers responding on the scene for them to internally communicate and coordinate amongst themselves?
Object to form.
I think it's the training would be how you're making a felony car stop. Are you able to follow the quote unquote format? But you're in a dynamic situation, and unfortunately, the suspects don't attend our training and comply to what you do in a classroom or a practical setting. So a lot of how their tactics or their approach, it's dictated by what the suspect wants to do.
Is it your contention that when Officer Mersereau got out of the car, he was investigating an underlying felony?
I believe so, yes, sir.
What was that underlying felony?
The fact that we had someone with a gun at the airport, without knowing all the specifics, you had someone with a gun at the airport, you had law enforcement calling for help or attempting to stop that vehicle that then flees on a flat tire. I think the totality of the circumstances, based on what we knew at the time, is we are approaching or making a serious offender here, because that's beyond the norm of, I don't want to, there are certain indicators that happen during an incident that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up and say, this isn't a regular car stop.
Certainly. Are you entitled to use deadly force on a serious offender based upon, kind of the conversation we've discussed, based upon the facts at the time that we know as of the time Officer Mersereau got out of his car? Was he authorized to use deadly force upon getting out of the car?
Object to form.
He would be authorized to use deadly force if deadly force was being employed or deployed against him, another officer, or a member of our community.
Is there anything that you're aware of that is of the time of Officer Mersereau getting out of a car that was an attempt at deadly force by Marvin Jones?
Object to form.
I wasn't there, so I don't know what happened. I know that we had a legal probable cause to make a car stop, and as the officer approached the car, the information that I had was that the suspect pointed a firearm and opened and fired at the officer in an attempt to kill him. At that point in time, the officer employed deadly force, which is completely within the guidelines of our training, completely within state law. And if I'm not remember correctly, the suspect, based on his own confession and admissions, is sentenced to 30 years in prison for what he did.
Certainly. And again, there's disagreement, and we'll address it with Mr. Marvin Jones, but as to whether he was sentenced because of the firing at the cop of scene 3 or what he did at scene 2 or didn't do. So, the kind of concern is trying to figure out what the policies and procedures were and whether your review of them shows they were violated at any point in that night. And I say that to kind of ask this question. Did you conduct any retraining of Officer Mersereau related to the use of force because of this incident?
Object to form.
All the officers go through a use of force refresher after, well, fortunately we haven't had that many cases, after they employ deadly force. So there's a classroom setting, and then there is a practical exercise that they're put through.
As of April 28, 2012, did Daytona Beach Police have any hiring preferences or guidelines related to, again, preferences related to former military or veterans?
I don't know if it applies for the hiring. I know it applies for promotional.
Okay. And is there any specific retraining or classroom or other education that goes towards those officers that have, been on the battle lines or received military training?
Object to form.
If we hire an officer who has military experience, he undergoes, clearly, first and foremost, he has to undergo a background investigation by our department. He is then examined by a psychologist. Everyone is. And then after they pass all of the background analysis, the psychological exam, they then enter the police academy where they undergo, I think it's 5 months of training there, where they're constantly evaluated by the staff. And then after they graduate, they spend 18 months with us internally in 3 phases. Phase 1 is classroom. Phase 2 is with the field training officers plural. And then in their final phase is called the ghost phase, where they are out on their own, but they are closely monitored by the supervisors and the field training officer.
Does, based upon the policies of Daytona Beach Police, does exposure of a firearm warrant deadly force?
Object to form.
There's a lot of circumstances that would have to go into that. Exposing a firearm, just exposing it, no. But if you expose it by pointing it into my chest, you're going to get shot.
Certainly. And are you aware of any facts that the exposure alleged against Marvin Jones was aimed or threatened any human being?
Object to form.
The only exposure that I know of from the reports that I read and the information that I gathered from the being on the scene and the investigators was that the suspect pointed the gun at Officer Mersereau and fired during the initial car stop.
And do you know exactly the moment that happened?
I do not.
Okay. Going back to cameras, it's my understanding that body cameras were implemented some short time after this. And I guess I gave your answer to my question, and let me see if it's accurate. Strike all that. Do you remember when body cameras were implemented?
Yes, they were implemented in 2012. We began experimenting with them in 2000, and the end of 10 into 11, we began experimenting with vendors, and our motors unit was the first ones to don them. And then in 2012 is when we made our first purchase. I just can't tell you when, but they were in progress. The purchasing, the policy implementation was all worked on in 2011.
And you're certainly to be commended for that. It's a much needed step. It's just finding funding, I guess. Did this incident have anything to do with the timing of the acquisition of body cameras at all?
Object to form.
It did not with the acquisition, but it went toward the argument. Because, as you said, there are people, elected officials, budget watchdog groups who question the amount of money we were going to spend. And that was an issue, an example, a living and breathing example of why we should have them.
Certainly. What about dash cams? It's my understanding that Officer Mersereau's vehicle didn't have any type of dash cam or car cam. What was kind of going on in 2012 about when those were on a car or not?
Object to form.
Basically around the economic downturn, and I don't think we didn't have as many dash cams to begin with. As the equipment became outdated or malfunctioned or just flat out broke, we didn't have the money to replace it. So there were only maybe at the time of the incident, and I'm guesstimating, there were less than 10 dash cams that were out there.
Okay. Is there a level of, traffic crime or traffic infraction, or what is the level of traffic infraction or use of a motor vehicle that would warrant an officer using deadly force?
Object to form.
The policy that was changed shortly after I arrived in 2006 is unless you have tire tracks on your chest, deadly force against the vehicle and the driver is prohibited. If the only weapon is the car.
Are you aware that Officer Mersereau got out of his vehicle at the Petty Boulevard and put himself unimpeded, literally right in front of the engine compartment, the front of Marvin Jones's vehicle?
Object to form.
I am not.
And then proceeded around the side. Does that violate any policies and procedures of Daytona Beach in any way? Getting out and kind of putting yourself in front of a vehicle.
Object to form.
If we're hypothetically talking here, if the suspect didn't have a gun and drove the vehicle at him and Mersereau fired at the vehicle, that would have violated the policy. But I would say that he was guilty of using bad tactics approaching from the front of a vehicle like that. But I don't know if he had given commands to put your hands up, wear your hands on the steering wheel. I don't know any of those things.
It's our understanding that, again, let's run with this hypothetical, that we believe we're making it based upon the facts of this case. But Officer Mersereau got out of his vehicle, again, got out kind of center mass of the front of Marvin Jones' vehicle with gun drawn. Would that have been a violation of Daytona Beach police or kind of bad tactics, as you say?
Object to form.
I would have to, again, hypothetically, did he use the patrol car to block the forward movement of a disabled vehicle, which wouldn't have been a bad tactical approach. And I don't know.
It would have been to block the vehicle, or it would not have been?
It would have been sound tactics if he was going to use his police vehicle to block the vehicle and use his police vehicle for cover. That would have been, in my opinion, a good tactic.
Would the opposite be true? Failure to use your vehicle to impede a vehicle coming at you and actually getting out has been unsound?
Objective form.
That, again, that would depend on the totality of the circumstances in a dynamic situation that's happening.
With a traffic stop, would it be a violation of Daytona Beach procedure, or, kind of like, you said, bad tactic to come out with weapon drawn at with the facts as you know it in this incident, meaning there had been some waving or exposure of a firearm, and some driving away on a vehicle with a flat tire. Would coming out with a gun drawn been a violation of Daytona Beach police protocol?
Objective form.
No, sir.
Why not?
Objective form.
You're looking at the totality of the circumstances. You have information coming from another law enforcement officer at one point in time of a person waving a gun around who flees the deputy when they try to approach that vehicle, who drives over whatever those stop sticks that they have out at the airport are, and is driving away. To me, with my experience, that's something isn't right here. The hair on the back of your neck would stand up, and when I'm coming out of that car, me as the police chief, with all my experience working in the fourth largest city in America, I'm coming out with my gun out of its holster, so I can discern why this erratic behavior with a person with a firearm, and why are you fleeing the police? Normally, in my experience, you don't flee the police because you're headed to McDonald's to get a soda. You're fleeing police for good reason.
Okay. Would you, the same facts, you say you would have gotten out gun drawn if you had two other officers respond with you who were communicating with you that they were responding, would you have coordinated it with them in any way before you got out of your car?
Objective form.
I would have gotten out with my gun drawn and been giving verbal commands. My understanding was Officer Mersereau was the lead officer, and I would have had, as in his position, I would have had my firearm out, shouting commands to the driver that my fellow officers would have been listening to and adhering to too, and they would have their firearms out as well.
Do you agree with the statement that an officer may not assume the negative about a person if the officer has the time and circumstances to do otherwise?
Objective form.
The operative words, time and circumstances, I would agree.
Okay. Do you agree that an officer may not react upon the negative about a person if the officer has the time and circumstances to do the otherwise?
Objective form.
Again, time and circumstances being the key words.
I understand. And I think that's going to be for the jury or a judge to determine, based upon all of the different witnesses of the relative time and circumstances here. Would you agree with that?
Objective form.
I would agree to the fact that this was an absolute tragedy to what happened to this young woman, to which the sole responsibility is because of the suspect's actions is what caused what happened. Had the suspect just got out of the car we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, but he chose to pick her up knowing he had a warrant on him, knowing that he was with a firearm, knowing the police tried to stop him, and then a horrible, horrible thing occurred to this young woman and her child because of his actions.
If Officer Mersereau fired upon this vehicle before he saw a firearm coming from this vehicle, would that have been a breach of protocol?
I would have fired
Objective
him.
form.
Sorry. I would have fired him.
Would you have prosecuted him?
I would have.
Would you have arrested him?
I would have referred everything to the state attorney's office because we don't have the ability to make that call. That state attorney would have to have arrested him. But I would have referred everything.
Did you do that in this instance?
Objective form.
Yes.
Okay. And I believe there was a grand jury. Was there a grand jury in this instance, or did you testify at a grand jury proceeding?
I did not testify before any proceeding, sir.
Are you aware if there was a grand jury that looked at this?
I am not, sir.
Okay. It's our understanding that Officer Mersereau fired on that evening between 23 and 35 times. Is there a limit to how much ammunition an officer is to carry on their person?
There is I'm sorry.
Let me just object to the form. Go ahead.
There is a policy. I'm not good at math. I know they normally carry 3 clips, 1 in their firearm, 2 on their belt, and then they almost all of them have a long gun in their trunk, and I don't know the number of rounds that's assigned to that.
Is an officer allowed to keep 1 in the chamber, so to speak? So in other words, a full magazine and 1 in the chamber?
Yes, sir.
Got it. And you may not be aware, but at any point did you become aware, or what point did you become aware that Officer Mersereau had been demoted full incidents of use of force of a canine?
Objective form.
I transferred him out of the K-9 unit.
Why?
Objective form.
As the police chief, I sign off on the K-9's canine bites, and several of the bites had come up to my attention, and I did a comparison to the other K-9 officers, and then I did a comparison to a nationwide use of K-9 and determined that it was unacceptable bite ratio.
What do you mean by unacceptable bite ratio?
Objective form.
I felt that the use of the canine in making the apprehensions were within policy and procedure. The one step further of the dog biting a suspect or being allowed to bite a suspect was not acceptable. In some quarters, canine handlers from outside of our department said it was. In other places, they said it wasn't. I'm not a canine expert, but in looking at the totality of the circumstances as the chief, I decided that some of those bites, while they may have been acceptable or excessive, and I didn't want somebody like that in my canine unit.
Why not?
Objective form.
Because our objective is to apprehend a person with the least amount of force possible, not punish the person or put an extra stamp on arresting someone because they ran or hid from us.
So would it be fair to say that before April 28, 2012, you disciplined Officer Mersereau for essentially some degree of a pattern or practice of misuse of force with a canine?
Objective form.
Yes.
Okay. more dangerous, a gun or a dog?
Objective form.
Any weapon that we deploy has the potential to cause death or serious bodily injury.
Is a canine a deadly weapon in your eyes?
Objective form.
It can be any weapon that we have, any that we carry, can be cause serious bodily injury or death.
Did you make the call to terminate Officer Mersereau over his use of force or fighting with another officer?
I did.
Why?
Objective form.
If you're going, well, first of all, you're not to put your hands on a fellow employee. You're not to put your hands on a member of the community. And that was just egregious, and I wanted him terminated for it.
And did you reinstate Officer Mersereau?
I didn't reinstate him. There was an agreement between the union and the city based on the fact that the officer at the time who would have been the victim refused to participate in the arbitration case. So we basically didn't have a victim to testify in front of the arbitrator, and the agreement between the city and the union was to 151-day suspension.
Did that reinstatement come with any parameters regarding, or I guess restrictions regarding Officer Mersereau's ability to use force?
It did.
Objective form, go ahead.
Sorry, it did not come with any restrictions, but the understanding was that after 151-day suspension, that termination would occur for a serious offense. And that previous suspension would be the linchpin to how we would go forward.
Is Officer Mersereau somebody you're comfortable with as a law enforcement officer at Daytona Beach Police after all of this?
Objective form.
I would say that Officer Mersereau is an officer that we have to closely supervise. He works hard, but he has to be supervised.
Why?
Form objection.
I will tell you that he received the Medal of Valor for his actions in the incident we're being deposed about. He has received numerous awards for that incident. That incident doesn't define him, nor do the incidents where he had to be transferred out of K-9 or the fight in the locker room. There's a totality of how to look at an officer, in my opinion, and you have to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he has to be supervised closely because there are times in his career that he has exhibited excellent judgment, and there is times that he has exhibited poor judgment, extremely poor judgment.
It looks like there's a lot of bad and ugly, and that's kind of what I'm trying to understand is how much bad and ugly were you aware of as of April 28, 2012? You'd obviously demoted him.
Objective form.
The K-9 incident is the only one that comes to mind, and I'm sure you've looked at his whole personnel file. He has received a lot of commendations for good police work. He has received a lot of public acclaim from members of the community for going above and beyond to help members of our community. And and the fair picture of that is there's the other side where I have had the canine incident with him. There is the point of where I did fire him for what happened in the locker room. So there is, in all fairness, he's not without sin.
Certainly, and dating back before this incident, there were incidents where he pushed past somebody to enter a residence that he was disciplined for or censured for. There was an incident where he violated policy regarding towing a vehicle. There was an incident where he searched somebody's, area between their testicles and their anus looking for, narcotics or a gun. Were you aware of those incidents as well?
Objective form.
I'm sure I was. I'm sure he was disciplined for all those incidents I'm assuming most of those incidents were disciplined by me.
Okay. Was there anybody else that does the discipline?
Can you repeat that question, please?
I mean, are you involved in every incident of discipline when it comes to an officer? Or are you made aware of it?
I'm made aware of every incident, and the more serious incidents are forwarded to me. In other words, an example would be a car crash. An officer was at fault for a car crash. That's not something that I would be made aware of it, but the captain and the deputy chief would met the discipline out, unless it was his fifth car crash, which would be a different thing.
You've indicated you have not read Officer Mersereau's deposition.
No, sir.
Assume for me that Officer Mersereau, and first of all, I invite you to do so, but assume for me that Officer Mersereau refers to, or any officer refers to suspects as bad guys. Would that be appropriate to commonly refer to suspects as bad guys?
Objective form.
That's what we deal with. We deal with good guys and bad guys. I don't think the term bad guys amongst us in law enforcement discussing things is necessarily a bad thing.
And I'll take it a step farther. I believe Officer Mersereau testified that he had never run into a good guy, that all of his suspects were bad guys. Again, would that be along the lines of Daytona Beach policy and the standards of community policing?
Objective form.
It's not amongst the standards of community policing because we do arrest good guys. Good guys make mistakes.
Is it appropriate for officers to refer to suspects as dopers?
Objective form.
Again, it depends on what what the perspective of the court case is that you're dealing with them. Dealing with them. I don't have a problem with police jargon being thrown around. I have a problem with the way, you would treat somebody. You're calling somebody a doper and you're planting narcotics on them. That's a problem. You're calling somebody a bad guy, and because you perceive him as a bad guy, you use excessive force. That's a problem. But referring to, hey, we went out and we grabbed the bad guy last night who did 2 gunpoint robberies, and we arrested him and recovered the firearm and the proceeds of the crime. I don't have a problem with that.
And whether it's officially a part of this case or not, that's to some degree what we feel the evidence shows here is an officer with a series of bad acts, misuse of force, who repeatedly refers to suspects, despite their status as innocent and proven guilty, as bad guys who exhibits, very aggressive manners of going and finding bad guys, and is, touts his number of arrests. And my question is, does that coincide with the standards of community policing?
Objective form.
I think that, unfortunately, I know you're doing your job for your client. You're doing an excellent job. I think you have to view the totality of what happened on that night of April 28th and realize, as we all do, that any one of us would have fired at an individual who pointed a gun out of a car window and fired at us. I get it that he's not my most model employee, but on the night in question, I stand behind his actions just as much as I fired him on the other for his actions that occurred in that locker room.
Do you stand behind his actions if there was no gun pointed at him at the time he fired?
Objective form.
But there was a gun that was used against him in an attempt to murder him.
And that's coming from Officer Mersereau.
It's coming from, I don't mean to interrupt you, Counselor. It's coming from the suspect. The suspect in this case is the one who initiated all of this event, at which any point in time he could have ended that. And we could speculate whatever we want. I know, and you're doing a great job, and I know where you want to go. But at the end of the day, for me, I'm focusing on this guy wanted to be killed by a cop, and he would kill a cop to accomplish that. He's the one who had no disregard for Miss Bailey whatsoever, or that child. None.
And I agree with you at a point in time. And you know, the question is, and I'm seeing if we agree on this simple question, is if Officer Mersereau fired before Marvin Jones displayed a firearm to Officer Mersereau, is that wrong?
Objective
Is that a
form.
breach of protocol?
Objective form.
As I stated earlier, if he would have opened fire on that vehicle and no firearm would have been pointed at him, there was no firearm present, he would have been fired, and I would have referred the incident to the State Attorney's Office for prosecution.
Okay. Is there... What are the stand? And I guess, you know, at some point Officer Mersereau was tripping and falling while firing, I believe.
Objective form.
I don't know that, sir.
Okay. Are you aware that before this there was an issue with an air card and some kind of insinuations of lying or theft against Officer Mersereau made by a fellow officer?
Objective form.
I was not, sir.
Okay. Are you aware that a substance called Jacked, and it's spelled J-A-C-K, the number 3 and then D, which is like a workout supplement, was found in Officer Mersereau's car on the night in question?
Objective form.
I was not, sir.
Are officers allowed to ingest workout supplements while on duty?
Objective form.
I don't know anything about that. This is the first I'm hearing of anybody ingesting workout formula. I don't even know what type of formula it is.
Bear with me. I'm going through notes trying to get this thing done.
Yes, sir.
You need to take a break? We can take a 5 minute. No.
I'm fine with that. It's up to y'all. I can finish probably within the next 8 minutes.
Okay, we're good, sir.
Okay.
Unless Bruce has to go.
No.
Are you aware of the U.S. DOJ program or the Office of Community Oriented Policing Services program?
Yes, sir.
Are y'all a member of it?
Oh, I don't think we're a member of lots of organizations. I don't know if that's a membership you would join. We get grants through them. We get all of their literature. We participate in their training.
Certainly. Do you know, and that was my next question about grants, do you know if you had received any grants as of April 28, 2012?
Yes, sir. We received numerous grants.
Okay. Are you a member of the International Association of Chief of Police?
Yes, sir.
Is that something you're a member of, or the department, or both?
I am, and I'm not sure how many members of my command staff are. What I am a very, very active member of is PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, which is a police think tank based out of Washington, D.C. Every member of my department with a rank of lieutenant or above belongs. Every member from the rank of lieutenant and above has gone through a 3-week course there on police management and police administration. It's hosted out of Boston University by the John F. Kennedy School of Government. And we are one of the leaders in the country in de-escalation. I was selected to go to Scotland in November of last year. I was one of 23 American police chiefs to be selected to study how a society where the police are not armed deal with folks who are armed with edge weapons and Molotov cocktails, or petrol bombs as they call them there, and how they de-escalate those situations.
And maybe it is viewing it in hindsight, but I guess that's what I'm trying to understand, is when you have 3 officers in 3 squad cars, show up at a scene that there has been no threat to those officers, and yet an officer comes out and escalates rather than de-escalates, why this incident was deemed appropriate.
I would disagree that we escalated that incident. I would think that having been in law enforcement for 28 years, and like I said, I hold the rare perspective of being a pretty good, in my opinion, street cop in Philly, one of the most decorated cops up there, involved in two shootings where I was decorated because I was under fire both times. Now, as a police administrator, talking about and implementing national reform, I look at what they did that night, and they did what we are paid and trained to do. There is a threat with a firearm. There is a person who is fleeing the police, acting erratically. They're drawing their weapons to protect themselves and to protect your community. Just drawing your weapon on somebody who you believe, based on information received from another law enforcement officer, is armed, is a proper and sound tactic. Now, if they would have just walked up to the car and fired into the car, they'd be going to jail. But they're protecting themselves. They're investigating an unknown. And statistically, more officers are injured or killed during a car stop. The next thing being up is domestic violence calls.
There's often more car stops done. So, I mean, that's a...
Yes, that is true.
That's true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's, I think that's just what I'm trying to get an understanding of, is how it's not escalation or how it's not a breach of community policing standards for an officer to go walk in front of a vehicle which could essentially run him over with a gun drawn when there's been no display of firearm against him, and essentially kind of escalates the system or the situation rather than block him in or coordinate other ways. He actually walked to the window where he would have put himself in harm's way.
Is that a question?
Yes. I mean, is that not a? How is that align with de-escalation, the de-escalation policy of Daytona Beach Police?
Object to the form. It's been asked and answered. This is a question been asked like 3 times now, John. I mean, I'll let him answer it one more time, but I think we're beating a dead horse here.
The officers have the right and the ability, no matter what term you want to use, community policing, investigative techniques, they are investigating a person with a gun. And they are doing what they can do in a dynamic situation. Okay? And they're going to make that, and while they are making that investigation, there is no de-escalation tactic in the world that was going to stop what he was going to do that night. You know, we didn't use community policing in Dallas when they killed 4 cops and they had to send a bomb in to end the threat without other officers getting killed. Let's understand there's a line here where community policing take effect and where you have a suspect who is armed, who wants to kill you, who makes the motions to kill you. You're not going to talk to that person and buy them a Happy Meal. They only understand that this is going to end, and it's going to end in somebody's death. And that's what this gentleman wanted to do. And the information that they had that night was, we have somebody who's behaving erratically, who's armed with a gun. We have the duty to investigate. It's a dynamic situation. There is no textbook way of they should have. We could all sit back and say should have, could have, would have. This wouldn't have happened. We weren't in control of that scene, as we are on most scenes. We try to get control. The suspect in this case was in complete control the entire time. He dictated our actions.
Do you keep use of force? Hang on, let me look at my note real quick. Does your department collect use of force data?
Yes, sir, we do.
Do you provide that to your supervisors?
I provide it to my supervisor, yes, sir, to the city commission and the city manager, and anybody who requests it gets it.
Did you keep that data in 2012?
Yes, sir.
And that's different than a series of ROR reports, I guess, right?
Yes, sir. Internal Affairs does a bi-yearly report for me that car crashes, taser usage, mace usage, canine bites, firearm usage, and then at the end of the year, and complaints against police.
I do want to thank you for what you do and for your service all this time, and I have no further questions.
Thank you, sir.
I have no questions. We'll reserve reading and signing.